All right, welcome back to the video series where I prepare for my new job. Last video got pretty far in this, got to where I could work on this book again. I had issues with my lab that I needed to do a lot of setup, but I did that mostly between videos. Last video, I was just putting the final touches on that, and I was also running the code in the template section of this book. So I learned how to use a playbook to copy files. That will come in handy later because I can use that to help make templates for my device configuration. So this next part, we're going to be continuing to explore that. So we can now, so let's make a file here and it'll be called, so let's create a text file called nxos.j2 as the template source. The template will follow the Jinja 2 convention of using double curly braces to specify the variables, as well as using the curly brace plus the percentage time to specify commands, percentage sign. So let's do that. Okay, so here's the syntax we can use to just pull in a variable. So it's going to be item.value.hostname is going to be the hostname that's going to be pulled in through another source. Okay, and here's the syntax required for conditionals. Okay, so the formatting is a little different because of how I had the browser arranged. But this roll operator is going to be on the same line as as the rest of it. Okay. You can see the syntax is also required for loops. as well as conditionals. Okay, so there's the template. I will save it and move on with the book. Oh, but before I do that, I'm going to need to modify the so I'll go back into it, and then I'm going to need to end the if statement. So one thing I think is a bit unusual is they didn't indent these because they're nested under here. That's something I would do if it weren't a Jinja 2 template, if it were Python or something. But I'm just going to follow along with what they have here. We can now put together a playbook to create network configuration templates based on the nxos.j2 file, the Jinja 2 template variables, the chapter 5_8.yml playbook expands on the previous template example with the following adaptations, following additions. Number one, the source file is nxos.j2. Number two, the destination file name is now a variable in itself taken from the nexus_devices variable defined in the playbook. Number three, each of the devices within nexus_devices contain the variables that would be substituted or loop over within the template, looped over. The playbook might look more complex than the last one, but if you take out the variable definition portion, it is very similar to our simple playbook, template playbook from earlier. All right, so let's do that playbook. Let's take a look at the one from earlier, just so we have a sense of how simple it really is. So yeah, it looks very, very simple. But let's keep with our kind of tradition of throwing away those old files, just so they don't clutter things up. Okay, so now they're using the same. Yeah, okay, so now this is going to plug into that template we just set up. If I go back, you'll notice that we've got NXOS, hostname, username, password. So that's going to very conveniently align here. So hostname, username. Let's see what else there is. There's going to be L3 VLAN interfaces, VLANs. So we've got L3 VLAN interfaces. We've got VLANs right there, VLAN interfaces. So yep, it aligns just like what was in the playbook in those variables. It's going to be very similar here under the bars because these are in fact the variables that will be plugged into that playbook. So you can see this I actually really like. This is really nice and clean and tidy. I really am a fan of this aspect of Ansible. We're going to have to use our custom variables, though. Okay, so I think tasks is going to be nested under bars. I'm not too sure about that, though. I do want to make sure I get that right. So we got name, host, bars, and then under here, all right, well, we'll see. I think, okay, so I think I'm nested a little bit. Oh, and I've got an extra comma here, but I think my nesting is off. Yeah, so I'm gonna wanna have this over like that. Yeah. All right, so now I can have tasks right here. So I don't need the home. That's what I figured out last time. So it's going to be root, templates, nxos.g2. Okay. Let us not execute the playbook just yet. We still need to take a look at the if conditional statements and the for loops enclosed within the open curly brace %, space %, end curly brace symbols from the Jinja2 template. Jinja2 loops. There are two for loops in our nxos.j2 template. One loops over the VLANs and the other loops over the VLAN interfaces. Let's look at it here and see if we can find the one looping over the VLANs. Oh, and this is going to be in our template. So here's a for loop. And here's another for loop. So here's the one looping through the VLANs. So it's going to be item.value.VLANs. So item.value.VLANs. So I believe it's going to be here. I'm not sure how that corresponds to item.value right now. Pretty sure it has something to do with item.key. But, or no, item, yeah. Well, anyways, here's what it's looping through. And then we've got another one for a VLAN interface in VLAN interfaces. So we're going to have the VLAN interface, which will be this key, and then we can choose a key from it. We're going to be choosing the IP key. So if you recall, we can also loop through both a list as well as a dictionary in Jinja2. In our example, the VLANs variable is a list, while the VLAN underscore interfaces variable is a list of dictionaries. The VLAN underscore interfaces loop is nested inside a conditional. This is the last thing that we will incorporate into our playbook before we execute the playbook. The Jinja2 conditional. Jinja2 supports an if conditional check. If we have added this conditional statement in two locations within the nxos Jinja template. So let's find those two locations without reading the rest of the book. So we've got one, and then we've got another one here. So let's think more about what that means. So item.value.netFlowEnable. So here we got netFlowEnable equaling true. So it'll trigger this, and we will enable the feature netflow. If it equals false, then we will not do that. We will skip to this next username line here. Likewise, for this if statement, we're looking at L3 VLAN interfaces. So if this is set to true, we will be executing this code for each of the L3 VPN interfaces we want to configure. Otherwise, we'll just be finishing the template at that time, skipping all the way down to the end where there's no further code to execute. One is with the netflow variable, and the other is the L3 underscore VPN underscore interfaces variable. Only when the condition is true will we execute the statements within the block. Now, one thing I would like to demo too is what happens if we don't have that key there. It's neither true or false. The key does not exist. But I will demo that eventually. In the playbook, we have declared netflow underscore enable to be true for nx-os-v1 and false for nx-os-v-2. So this is very clearly a typo in this book. Yeah, I kind of have said many times before that I'm a little bit dissatisfied with this book, but it's getting into kind of the content I want to learn about. So doing it through a book that I'm not 100% satisfied with, for me, is better than just not doing it at all. So I'm going to continue on. Finally, we are ready to run our playbook. Okay, so it looks like we got an issue here. So mapping values are not allowed in this context. The error appears to be line 32, column 13. So the offending line is here. We're not allowed to map values. Let's take a look if that, yep, so the file path is correct, templats. But this item.key.conf, there appears to be both k equals v shorthand syntax and YAML in this task. Only one syntax may be used. We could be wrong, but this one looks like it might be an issue with missing quotes. Always quote template expression brackets when they start a value. For instance, okay, so really great help. Really impressed by that help offered through Ansible, because I can tell it looks very clear that you can see how every single other time I've got these double curly braces. Well, yeah, double curly braces. So I've actually only got it one time. But you can see in that one time I've got it, it's got quotes. So let's try adding quotes. Oops, so still didn't work. Okay. Let's look at that line a little bit more closely and compare it with the book. Okay, so I'll take a screenshot of what it's meant to look like, because it changes how it looks if I move the browser. So one thing I do notice is the spacing is different here. It's all the way to the edge. I don't know if it has to be that way. Oh, I wonder if this with dict is actually aligned under template. So I think I'm going to try that. Yep, and oh, that was one of the issues anyway. So there's a new issue. This task template has extra params, which is only allowed in the following modules. The error appears to be line 29. The offending line appears to be task's name. So, okay, there's an issue with the name there. All right, so let's take a look at here. So we've got name, template with dict. Okay, so I think it needs to be nested differently. Let's change the formatting of this book so we can see how it might differently be nested. So we're going to have multiple columns. So you can get a more clear sense. Okay, hopefully this is the clearest sense we can get. So we see this is not indented all that much, but it's definitely not at the same indentation level, because you can see I have, the way I have it, the indentation level of tasks is the same as the indentation level with bars. But the way they have it, the indentation, oh yeah, it does appear to be the same indentation level as with bars. So yeah, I'm not sure what the issue is. They do have these source and destinations completely unindented, so I guess I'll try that. Okay, so let's take a look at the Github repo and see how their file is different from mine. So the name of the playbook is 5_8 within templates. So there appears to be no difference. They have the same indentation that I had before on their GitHub. So it's going to be indented under template. And then with dict is not going to be indented. Yep, so it looks exactly the same as how I have it. There's a extra space here, but I don't think that would make a difference. I can always add it in, but I guess I'd rather not. So there's an offending line here. And let's see how many spaces there are before tasks. There's that number. Same number before vars, hosts, and name. We can try adding the extra spaces or the extra new lines. Looks like there's one new line after hosts. Nope. So yep, there's a syntax problem, and that's this task template has extra parameters that are not allowed. Another thing I would like to try is exiting and then taking this whole file as is directly out of here, editing it so that the username and password is correct. Okay. And then we'll also need to fix up the file path. Okay, but everything looks good, I believe. Oops, don't need to save the file. Okay, so this is the playbook, which we're editing now. We've also got the Jinja 2 template and the host file, and then we've got those files left over from when we first ran a local host playbook. So now it works. Yeah, I'm not sure what the problem was. That really kind of threw me for a loop. But we've gotten okay. We don't have any changed though, and that's what we're going to need to get if we're actually configuring these SVIs, switch virtual interfaces. So let's read the error message. Template error, expected token in got dash. So so in the template, so template error. So let's look at the template. So it expected a in, but instead it got a dash. Okay, so let's do the same thing and find that file here and look at them side by side. So a few differences in spacing. I like the spacing here better. It's much easier to read. I think I'm going to be changing the spacing. Okay, so yeah, I don't see any. Aha, okay. So yep, I did a dash instead of an underscore here. There is no such thing as the variable VLAN dash NUM. It's only VLAN underscore NUM. So really good error message there again. I'm really, at this point, pretty impressed with Ansible for some of the really straight to the point, easy to understand error messages that I've seen so far. So here we can see it changed. So which one did it change? It changed the local host. So let's keep reading the book. Do you remember that the destination files are named after the item.key.conf? Two files have been created with the device names. So there they are. And you can see we've got configuration in there. That's going to be relevant for each of those devices. So really nice and handy if you've got a whole bunch of devices and you need a whole bunch of configs. Ansible is really your thing. Let's check the similarities and differences in the two configuration files to make sure all of our intended changes are in place. Both files should contain the static items such as feature OSPF. So do I see that? Yep, I can see feature OSPF on the first one here, and then feature OSPF on the second one as well. The host names and other variables should be substituted accordingly. So yep, we've got different host names for the different devices. And we've also got NetFlow configured on this one, but not this one. And only NXOSV-1.NetConf should have NetFlow enabled, as well as the layer 3 VLAN interface configuration. So that I did not check. So here's the difference between 2 and 1. Yep, and we can see 1's got all of the configuration for SBIs, but 2 doesn't have that. It's just configured VLANs for layer 2. It doesn't have a interface on them. So there's a whole another section of config on -1 that is missing from -2, and that's by design with our template. Neat, huh? This can certainly save us a ton of time for something that required repeated copy and paste before. Personally, the template module was a big game changer for me, and for me too. Like I didn't know you could do this in Ansible, and yeah, this is a game changer. This module alone was enough to motivate me to learn and use Ansible a few years ago. Yeah, because I remember, like at the beginning of the series, I was really questioning what use is there for Ansible when it comes to reaching out to the devices. Well, Ansible does a lot more than just reach out to the devices. It can create configuration for your devices without ever having to reach out to them. So really powerful thing. You want to talk about where do I start? Start on read-only tasks. Well, you don't even have to start on read-only tasks, you don't even have to log into Gear to start. You can just start by, at the click of a button, generating all of the configurations that your coworkers need, and they need a config for this device. Well, click, they got it. And instead of them having to spend a lot of work to create it, you just spend a little bit of work up front with what you've learned about Ansible, and you've saved hours of work for everyone else. Our playbook is getting kind of long. In the next section, we will see how we can optimize the playbook by offloading the variable files into groups and directories, group and host variables. Note that in the previous playbook, chapter 5_8.yml, we have repeated ourselves in the username and password variables for the two devices under the Nexus_devices variable. So yep, these are all, these two here are going to be the same for each of these devices. This is not ideal. If we ever need to update the username and password values, we will need to remember to update at both locations. And you can see here it's not ideal where, oops, it's going to be Cisco1 now for the password instead of just Cisco. So, okay, well, Cisco1, Cisco 2. Just going through and changing them for 2 is not a big deal, but you can see how if you've got 100,000 devices, it's just not even possible to go through and change them all. Yeah, you can use a scripting language like Python to do that, but even that's going to be a little bit of work. This increases the management burden as well as the chances of making mistakes. As best practice, Ansible suggests that we use the group_bars and host_bars directories to separate out the variables in our playbook. So instead of doing a little bit of work on Python and going through all these files and making these changes, you simply just make a change in your host_bars or group_bars file, and you've done all the work. No scripting needed. For more Ansible best practices, check out, okay, yeah, I'll check out that. To look at the usage for grouping variables, we will create a new directory called group_host_bars in our working directory to house the code in the next section. We will maintain what we have already written for chapter 5_8.yml and use that as a base for the next example. Let's start by copying over the chapter 5_8.yml playbook to this new directory and renaming it to chapter 5_9.yml and see how we can add variables to the playbook. Okay, so they want this to be copied over, but we'll just continue on. Group variables. By default, Ansible will look for group variables in the same directory as the playbook called group_bars for variables that can be applied to the group. By default, it will look for a file name that matches the group name in the inventory file. For example, if we have a group called Nexus-devices in the inventory file, we can have a file under group_bars named Nexus-devices to house all the variables that can be applied to the group. We can also use a special file named all to include variables applied to all the groups. We will utilize this feature for our username and password variables. First, we will create the group_bars directory. All right. Then we can create a YAML file called all to include the username and password. Okay, and I don't know, oh, they do want it in the group directory. So let's do nano group bars all and create this file. I'm going to use our own username and password. Okay, and this I think is all that's necessary. In the chapter 5_9.yml playbook, we can now use the group variables for the playbook. Okay, so they renamed the chapter 5.8, so let's do that just by copying it to a different file and then removing the original file 8, because the rename, I'm not sure how to do that in Linux, especially with not, because I looked it up and I did not have the command on here. So, but this is a perfectly fine way to do it unless you're really low on space or you're doing that with really large files. All right, so let's edit that. So now we're going to be using variables to plug into this instead of just putting them in the playbook like this. And then instead of having to change it in multiple locations, we just change it in a single location and then it propagates out to the multiple locations. All right, moving on. Using group variables works when we have the same value for multiple devices. In our example, nx-osv-1 and nx-osv-2 have the same username and password. In the next example, we will take a look at how we can use host-specific variables if they are different. Host variables. We can further separate out the host variables in the same format as the group variables. This was how we were able to apply the variables in the Ansible 2.8 playbook examples in Chapter 4, the Python Automation Framework, Ansible Basics. And earlier in this chapter, mkdir host_variables. In our case, we execute the commands on the local host. And so the file under host_vars should be named accordingly, host_vars/localhost. In our host_vars/localhost file, we can also keep the variables declared in group_vars. Okay, so okay. After we separate out the variables, the playbook now becomes very lightweight and only consists of the logic of our operation. Okay, so yeah, it looks like we've got, okay, so we're going to be doing, so if I cut out the chapter now, we can see in our playbook itself, we've got Nexus devices, this whole thing here. But what we're going to do is move that over to host_vars localhost file, because we can see this is coming from there. And then we're going to change our playbook, and it will no longer have this in there at all. It will just have name, hosts, and then all the way down here tasks, and then it will know, since it's a local host, it'll be able to call from that host vars localhost file, because it knows to check for that folder for host vars. And of course, you can overwrite it by having it be in the playbook, but we're not going to be doing that. So let's do a nano host vars localhost. Okay, so this is the exact same thing that was in the playbook, but now we're just putting it in a different file so that we can have things logically positioned on our guest-1. And when we make changes, we can make the changes in places that make more sense to make them. And not only that, we can make changes looking specifically only at the things that are necessary for us to change. Whereas if we kept it in the playbook, we'd have to work through that logic that's on there and make sure we're not making changes to the incorrect part of the playbook, and we don't accidentally copy and paste something into the wrong section. We don't accidentally fat finger and put an extra character somewhere in the logic. It's kept away, it's kept safe, and when we make modifications, we're making modifications only to the area by only modifying a file that contains the things we want to modify. Whereas if it were all in the playbook, there would be other things as well that aren't the same as what we're trying to update. Okay, so now we've got it more logically grouped. It'd be nice if we could have this be just a because it'd be nice if we could for loop through these and not have to make one of these files for every single device we want. But for now, this looks good. So now we can make this file a lot simpler by not having the var section, because it's going to know to reach out to that special file we made instead of having to look within the playbook itself. And we can in fact do that without even specifying any extra explicit command, because it's all happens implicitly. Okay, so let's give it a shot. The group_vars and host_vars directories not only decrease our operations overhead, they can also help with consolidating sensitive information into a few files and securing the files with Ansible Vault, which we will look at next. Okay, so we didn't run the playbook again yet. It looks like they're going to have another one. But anyways, let's move on before we. Well, I'm kind of tempted. I think I'm just going to run this again because I want to see if separating that out into a different file worked. Perfect. So it was able to do the task. It was able to do everything seamlessly, and you can see, yep, it's idempotent, so nothing changed. Having that separated out into a different file in a different directory was seamless. As you can see from the previous section, in most cases, the Ansible variable provides sensitive information, such as a username and password. It would be a good idea to put some security measures around the variables so that we can safeguard against them. The Ansible Vault provides encryption for files, so they do not appear in plain text. All Ansible Vault functions start with the Ansible-vault command. You can manually create an encrypted file via the create option. You will be asked to enter a password. If you try to view the file, you will find that the file is not in clear text. If you have downloaded the book example, the password I used was just the word password. Okay, so let's try to look at what he's got in the book. So let's do a git pull. So git clone of his repo, which is right here. Oops, and I think I am going to need the key, actually. Well, let's see if I can use. Okay, so yep, I don't need authentication at all. I'm good to go. So here's that best practices thing. Let's just go through some of the topics. So we've got layouts. Yeah, so here's some of the topics. Really good, really well written documentation. Okay, so now let's go and enter in that password to view the files. Okay, so here's that file secret.yml. So let's try to print it out. And you can see it's encrypted. It's just a bunch of random numbers. Now let's try to print it out using Ansible Vault. and there it was. So it's now decrypted. You can see I was able to use the help on it. So if the help tells you the command to run it, then what you need after that. So it's all separated by a space, tells you how to use it. So I wanted to decrypt, so that's what I chose. And I just needed the password, which they gave me in the book. It's just password. So the decryption was successful. So now let's see. So we know that the name of this is My Secret Playbook now that it's no longer encrypted. So let's encrypt it again, so it's not sitting out there decrypted. And we'll use the same password from before. Okay, and we'll print that out. So yep, now it's encrypted again. To edit or view an encrypted file, we will use the edit option to edit or view the file via the view option. Okay, so let's make our own secret file instead of just going in the repo, the book repo. Let's even just remove it and get it back fast. I just don't want it cluttering up things. So let's do, let's go back one and let's do Ansible Vault. Oops. Create secret.yml. Password for the password. Okay. So we'll just say secret file. There we go. Now if I cat that out, it's all encrypted. So let's do edit. Oops, and it's going to be edit. There we go. So now I can see everything that's in there. I can edit everything that's in there. Let's now encrypt the group underscore vars /all and group underscore vars /localhost variable files. So that makes a lot of sense. All our passwords are going to be in there. So what better thing to do with those passwords than encrypt them so that if anyone wants to see them, they have to know the password to get all the passwords. All right. So templates. So it's going to be Ansible Vault. Okay, and we can do this in one command because we can include multiple files. Okay, and let's just use password, keep it easy. I don't want to have to forget what I put in there. But of course, in production, you'd be using a more secure password. Now, when we run the playbook, we will get a decryption failed error message. Okay, so we're going to be running that same playbook. It looks like they changed it to chapter 10, so let's do that as well. Attempting to decrypt, but no vault secrets found. So we didn't get, okay, so this is interesting. It didn't specify the host's inventory file. So error attempting to decrypt but no vault secrets found. We need to use the --ask-vault-pass option when we run the playbook. Okay, so now we need to know what the password is. Password is password. Okay, so the decryption will happen in memory for any vault encrypted files that are accessed. There we go. So everything went really well. Prior to Ansible 2.4, Ansible Vault required all the files to be encrypted with the same password. Since Ansible 2.4 and later, you can use Vault ID to supply a different password file. You can also save the password in a file and make sure that the specific file has restricted permission. Now, this is what I did when I created my script in production. I made sure that the passwords were all stored in a different file. I made sure that only I had access to that file. This is the strategy I decided to use. So let's explore how Ansible would use that. So let's do a nano on, or let's do a cat vault password .txt. So yeah, I'm not sure where they're getting that from. Let's go back into templates and let's make that and then say keep out. Okay, and now let's do change mod 400. But then of course it's going to be under templates. Okay, so now let's do ls-lia. Okay, so now we've got the permissions changed, so only I can read the file, but nobody else can read it at all. And in fact, I can't even edit it right now unless I change the permissions. We can then execute the playbook with the --vault password file option. So this is different from ask pass. Here you just read it from the file. So let's try that. Oops. Provided host list is empty, only localhost is available. Note that the implicit localhost does not match all. No vault secrets were found that could decrypt. Okay, so yeah, the contents of that file are not accurate. I'm going to need to change them. So oh, I don't even have the file at all anywhere. Yep, I don't even have that file on here. So let's create that. Oh, yeah, no, I do. It's hidden. That's what. So if anyone's watching, curious about what this leading dot means, it means that when you just do a regular ls, you can't see the file unless you do an ls-a. So if you want to hide that from casual users, not clutter up their folder, or you want a little bit of extra security, although it's not super powerful security because you can just do the -A. You might be able to restrict it so that people with certain permissions can't do the -A, but that is what the leading dot does. So this is not the password. We've got to change this to be the actual password, which is password. Perfect. So this is a much better result. There you go. And now you don't have to memorize the password. Just by nature of it being in your space in Linux, it is secure because you know your own password that you passed into, that you logged into Linux with. So you're the only person who can access your file, access that portion. We can also encrypt just a string and embed the encrypted string inside the playbook by using the encrypt_string option. So let's try that. Okay, so let's encrypt the string. Well, let's take a look at what that new is going to be. Okay, so yep, that's going to be our string to encrypt. So let's encrypt the string NEW with a capital N. We'll use password again. There we go. So we just encrypted capital N, lowercase e, lowercase w. The string can then be placed in the playbook file as a variable. In the next section, we will optimize our playbook even further with include and roles. Okay, so I think I'm going to leave that section for later. It's kind of hot in here. I think the video might have been going for long, and there was just a lot of really great content in this. So kind of moving on, I think is packing a bit too much. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.